Good afternoon, everyone. This is Kim Churches from AAUW. I'm so glad you could join us this afternoon. For those of you calling in from Hawaii or the West Coast, still good morning to you, but it's about a minute past 2 p.m. Eastern time. So we'll go ahead and get started. First off, it looks like we have about 90, just a little over 90 people on the call, which is fantastic. How we're going to proceed with this is I'll share some information along with the PowerPoint deck that hopefully you all can see through the technology and that we shared earlier this morning via email. At the end, if you do have questions or have comments, you can email them at any time during the presentation to, is that going to go through? Maybe not. Hold on. To executive@aauw.org. So any questions about the materials that we'll review or any comments on the future of AAUW, please do not hesitate to send an email during the call to executive@aauw.org. I see we're at 99 participants today, which is just fantastic. I'm so thrilled so many of you could join us from branches, from state leadership, from national committees and other important groups. Hey, we hit the magic 100 number. That's great. Well, now that we know we have a good critical mass for the call, I would like to begin. As you know from my introductory email and from our strategic planning process, that your national board and the senior staff at AAUW have been deeply focused and keenly focused on controlling our costs, evaluating AAUW's legacy structures, and ensuring we can modernize AAUW for today and for its future. Importantly, all of this work has been focused on our mission to advance gender equity for women and girls. And it's been focused on our strategic plan, as well as our ability to have meaningful impact in the marketplace and in our society. So the board and the senior staff have undertaken an ongoing and in-depth analysis of AAUW's budget, expenses, and revenue generation. This is actually one of the 4 focus areas within the strategic plan that was launched last summer after input from almost 6,000 members, as well as several hundred people outside of AAUW. As we think about our analysis of our budget, both on revenues and on expenses, this includes ensuring we have stronger pipelines for revenue projections, fiscal forecasting, and a close monitoring of our restricted and unrestricted assets, which I'll talk about on the call today. Now, if you have attended a national convention, a state convention last year or this year, you know well that we've been focusing in these ways. I just got done speaking with many of the state conventions around the country and had a chance to interact with many of you as members to really transparently share where we are and where we're going and why. I started almost 2 years ago. In fact, next week marks my 2-year anniversary. And frankly, it has taken us this full 2 years both to look at the focus for the strategic plan, as well as to both understand the business implications for AAUWs and the implications for our members and valued constituents, to ensure that all of our pipelines and our pathways forward were real and based on best practices. It has been a phased approach to right-size AAUW for today and tomorrow. And it is in keeping with what the search committee of AAUW members and the previous board were eager for when I joined AAUW in June of 2017. Now, I'll be providing some bad news, some good news, and some pathways for the future. So in the bad news department, for a decade, AAUW has been running annual deficits on its national budget, regularly and repeatedly dipping into its unrestricted net assets, or otherwise known as a savings account. We all know, as you think about your household budgets, that a savings account is not limitless, and we are near running out. In fact, the organization we all love cannot survive if deficits continue. In short, a quarter of our annual budget was being paid from our savings account. Unrestricted assets are projected to run out early in our next fiscal year. That means as early as October or November at the end of 2019. So if AAUW is to survive and thrive, we must rely on sound and accurate financials, budgeting, and forecasting. Last week, thanks to incredibly hard, sensitive work by your senior staff here, we had to eliminate a total of 20 positions at AAUW. That includes reducing our workforce just last week by 10 positions. That means we had a hiring freeze since last fall, and 8 unfilled positions since that hiring freeze remained unfilled, plus 10 positions that were very difficultly eliminated last week, and 2 more positions making up the 20 that will be moving from full-time to part-time work. I want to say a note about the 10 human beings that were affected by this reduction in force. These were incredible, compassionate, committed leaders at AAUW doing amazing, amazing work with real mission impact. Some had been here for less than 1 year, some for 10 or more years. This had nothing to do with any one of them individually at all. It was not a personal decision. But AAUW must do less with less if it will continue to operate long into the future. Unfortunately, we could not maintain our current staffing level. We have to cut the annual budget significantly by $5 million annually. Because some of our, actually many of our operating expenses are fixed and cannot be cut, our largest expense line then is staffing. It's human capital and functionality. And therefore, we had to make additional cuts to staffing. I'll say a note about some of those areas that we could not cut. This lease. For those of you who attended a state convention this year, you heard me candidly and transparently say that the building that AAUW owned for many, many years, in my opinion, should not have been sold. It was one of the greatest unrestricted net assets this organization has. Why? Because the majority of our assets are highly restricted in our fellowships and grants, meaning all of the good work we're doing thanks to your generosity and decades of members before to establish our American fellowships, our international fellowships, and our community action grants. But my salary, the work that we do on Equal Pay Day, the work that we do to lobby on Capitol Hill and ensure that we can move the Paycheck Fairness Act forward, the work that we do and share with you member leader materials are not covered by fellowships and grants. So that's one example. Another, as I say about the building, is this lease. Unfortunately, the lease that was signed by the previous administration is frankly both too large of office space for us and is at too high of a price tag. Meaning, as we look at the supply and demand in the competitive Washington, D.C. marketplace, we are paying, frankly, more per square foot than available space in the area. And because the previous administration chose to sign a very long lease, in fact, 16 years long, we are not able to negotiate out of it. It is a very Loctite lease. So that becomes an albatross for which we cannot get rid of. That is an area that is fixed and we cannot move out of that lease. That said, for the past 3 board meetings, we have been very transparently sharing this information with your nationally elected board to look for all opportunities to sublet space and reduce our almost $3 million per year lease. Additionally, we cannot cut a lot of our IT functions. If there is one thing I hear from AAUW members besides how to grow local and national membership, it is what are we going to do to improve our communications and to improve our website and technology. Frankly, our IT infrastructure has been ignored for about 20 years. And we must make sure we're making the right investments if we are going to continue. Third is finance. Obviously, because we are an IRS authorized 501c3 organization, we have to be exceedingly careful with our finances, and there are certain areas that we cannot cut. And we know many branches and states rely on AAUW to assist with their filing, etc. I'm checking with my friend Shannon here. Is everything working all right?
We understand that folks can see the first slide, but did not advance to the second slide. Is that accurate? I'm getting nods from my colleagues in the next row.
Okay. Are you seeing the second slide now? No, you are not. Okay. We're going to see if we can share it a different way. Please hold on for just a moment.
All right.
All right. Yay. We now can see the second slide, which says you can submit an email during this call to executive@aauw.org. Okay. So let's continue. I'm going to say a few more words and then I'll take you through the slides. The senior staff directing the major departments at AAUW wrestled with how we were working on preparing the proposed fiscal year 2020 budget for the national board to make sure that we were conservative in how we looked at revenue projections based on actuals, not based on previous budgets, but based on actually what revenue lines had been coming in over the past 5 to 7 years, and what those subsequent pipelines looked like for fiscal year 20 and beyond. Furthermore, we did all we could over this year to proactively cut our budgets. In fact, yet again, in my second year here, we proactively cut the budget by 10% last fall. We instilled a hiring freeze, as I mentioned, and a lot of other steps to cut our budget lines as much as possible. That said, we had to make cuts across the board of the organization for it to continue to thrive. And we made decisions based on our capacity, our mission, our strategic plan, and our ability to have impact. Frankly, we had to cut into the muscle of the organization. This is not just a prudent step, it's a necessary step. While AAUW as we know it cannot continue as a $20 to $22 million organization, it can have great impact as a $15 to $16 million organization. Change is hard. And before we dig into the slides, I do want to point out that of the nation's many nonprofits, there are numerous examples of great organizations doing amazing work with budgets of even $5 million. So this will not impede our ability to still have dramatic impact on our mission. So let's review a couple of financial slides now. This first slide here, we're having a little a pop-up window here. This first slide here shows for you what's been happening with essentially our unrestricted net assets over about a decade. Now, I joined, as you know, in 2017, and I'll explain a lot of this to you. But essentially, for basic modern best practice of nonprofits, if your average budget is $20 million, you should always have at least $10 million in reserves. That's why you see that red line going down the middle that says ideal savings of 10 million. Obviously, as we compress to a $15, $16 million organization, that number too will go down to about $7.5 to $8 million. But I want you to see where we were in net assets back in 2010. We were at over $13 million, which is very healthy. But right about that time, we started spending in the previous administration at a very great spend rate, more than the revenues being brought in annually, and dipping into that savings account year after year. So go fast forward over to the large red line in 2016 before the sale of the building, and then the gain from that sale of the building. But that gain did not make up all of the losses over those years. And as you'll see, by the end of 2016, we were already in deficit again. Now, our audit committee and finance committee were able to do some prior period adjustments with accountants and our auditors to ensure that we had been filing things correctly, and that was able to help us a bit. But because we have not been working off of realistic budgets, we've had essentially unicorn visions for revenues for far too long, we had to do some very hard work over the past 2 years. Now, that sale of the building generated about $13 million, but again, it eliminated our best unrestricted net asset. Right now, because we are below that ideal savings amount, we don't even have something that if we wanted to take a line of credit on to continue a lot of these functions and keep some of these human beings, we do not have an unrestricted net asset to borrow against. It's a little bit like getting a home equity loan if you want to do some improvements on your own home. Because we don't have a net asset that is largely unrestricted, we're unable to do so. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, this is the one that is included with for our finance committee and our investment committee and our national board. And we thought it's another way of showing it from the other slide, and it really shows that compounding over time of over $45 million of deficit spending, meaning year in and year out, dipping into that savings account. And you all know, just like your own savings account, or just like the savings account I have established for my daughter Ruby's college fund, it is not limitless if you keep dipping into it. And we are scarily at that point here where we must make those decisions to ensure this organization's move forward. Let's move on. This, I know many of you are aware of this. I was in Florida last week. I have been in New Jersey. I've been all over the country at state conventions, and everywhere I go, I hear from branch and state leaders saying they are concerned about the size of our branch membership. This is just a 4-year snapshot. And as you can see here, in fact, in 2010, 5 years prior to this, the branch number, this is only branch members, not taking into account national members or others. But branch members 5 years before that was 52,350. And a decade before that, more still. Further, you also know that the average age of our members is now 72. And many of you have told me it has been very difficult to attract young audiences to become members. Given the trends we've seen on membership and knowing our membership dues as a revenue line covers only 15% of the annual budget in fiscal year 2019, we brought in a nationally recognized expert on membership and associations named Vanessa Dennison of Dennison and Associates based in Seattle. She was retained to give us an independent external assessment of our membership, our fundraising, and finance functions. Let me show you her analysis now. So one, she quickly observed, and this is not news to you if we think that our average member is 72 years of age, there are only less than 8% of our members are under the age of 60. Less than 6% of our donors are under 60. That's marked when we look at trying to diversify our streams for the future. This is something that Vanessa put together for us, and you can refer back to this later. But I really want you to get down to the threat level. Because we have to modernize in a lot of ways, and because we cannot continue to do things the exact same way year in and year out, we are seeing our membership numbers go down. Now, what I want to assure you of is this is not unique to AAUW. For many, many, many organizations that reach their strength in the 20th century, they are suffering with the same issues of changes in demography, changes on a generational level of how they engage with folks. And so we have to be strategically engaging with people where they are, not assuming that they're going to want to join us in the same ways we've been working for a long, long time. There are a lot of tremendous strengths that Vanessa noted, that we are focused on reaching younger audiences in the ways that they wish to be reached, not in assuming we know how, but more by actively asking them questions about it. We know how extraordinary loyal our membership base is and how active they all are. We know that there are opportunities with technology. We know that there are ways we can revitalize our branches and bring more value. We're seeing that with some good examples of branches around the country. But we also know we have some weaknesses around this. We know technology, as I said earlier, has hindered our ability because we've had homegrown systems here that don't talk well to one another. And the only way to actively use the AAUW website right now is sadly through the search field, which is not conductive for or constructive for the 21st century. So this was her call to action to us, really an external assessment of letting us know where the weaknesses are, where the threats are, and where we can move forward. Let's go on to the next slide. She also wanted us to address that magical word of membership. And this is something she brought, and there is a link at the bottom of this slide that you can refer to later of how we think about membership today. And frankly, for a lot of the millennials and Generation Z that I have been meeting with in focus groups around the country, they're not even interested. They're interested in being part of an equity network. They're not interested in joining in the same ways that their mothers and grandmothers and grandfathers, uncles and fathers were in other organizations. And in fact, I've heard from many, many AUW members that their own daughters and nieces and neighbors' kids, even when gifted a membership, did not stay with AAUW because it didn't meet their needs in the 21st century in the same way. But I want you to look at the difference between the way that millennials think about engaging with organizations versus those of us that were born before the year of 1980. One, on the 1980 side, we see a lot of members only. What's in it for us? What do we want that we're going to get out of this access? It's access to things, it's advance notice, it's discounts like our really valued Office Depot discount or Geico discounts, etc. It's feeling like you're part of something, but that you're getting special privileges. But for millennials and for Generation Z, it's much more a sense of belonging, that they want to support the cause, support the mission, make a global impact on the world in a meaningful way. So that's just a little bit example of, we cannot assume just because the way we've done it is going to attract new audiences in the same way. Okay. So before we get into these next two charts, I want to say a couple more things on membership to get to where we are with some of the staffing and functional changes. So on membership, given the trends we're seeing and knowing that it's covering now 15%, we are putting in place new ways to engage young audiences. As I said, I've been conducting gender equity roundtables with men, women, and non-binary gendered people around the country, coast to coast. I just went through one a couple weeks ago in Chicago and learned more from that one. But really what is amazing is how consistent the messages are with regardless of the zip code or the city in which I'm in. And really they are telling us how they want to get engaged with gender equity beyond the traditional membership model, but in a way that complements our traditional membership model. Membership is not going away. However, given these budget cuts, $5 million in the proposed fiscal year 20 budget that your nationally elected board will vote on, we did have to reduce 2 staff positions on the membership team, including those who assist with our customer service department, Connect. Moving forward, I need to ask you for a bit of patience. Due to these changes, we will no longer be actively answering the Connect phone day in and day out on the phone line, but you can leave a voicemail message, or if you want prompter service, send an email and our team will do our very best to answer your inquiries in a couple of days. Obviously, if it's urgent, do indicate that in your email or in your voicemail, and we'll be sure to triage as quickly as possible. So now let's refer back to your PowerPoint. Let's get into expenses and revenues. On the expense slide, you'll note this is budget to actual. So you can see very clearly in fiscal years 2018 and 2019 that we've cut far more than had been done in previous years, even though we had been underspending to budget. So that's in the good news department. I always say if you think of Winnie the Pooh, you want to be Tigger as you lay out your idea of expenditures for the next fiscal year, and Eeyore as you think about revenues, meaning highly, highly bearish on revenues and highly, highly bullish on expenses. So this is good as we get into our fiscal years that we're cutting more, but frankly, it is not enough. And you will note that for fiscal year 19, even though our budget was about 21 million, we'll be spending less than 19 million. So let's go ahead and go to the revenue side of this. Now, there are some odd spikes here. It looks a little bit like a heart monitor for you. And you'll see the budget line here has been pretty steady state, assuming that we would be able to raise big revenues. But look at that, that flow chart down to fiscal year 15 and then back up to 16. Obviously, that takes into account the sale of the building and some very good investment earnings that year, which of course, you know, I'm no magician. As much as I look into my crystal ball, I cannot guarantee our investment earnings, nor can anybody on your investment committee or finance committee or on your national board. All of us saw hits in our retirement plans at December of 2018, and we can't guarantee that in any way. But look at the monies tracking down. The problem is we were keeping our budget steady state, and we were going budget to budget in our projections and not really digging underneath the hood of the car as to the pipelines behind the revenue models. As we see those decreasing membership dues, right? And membership numbers, as we have ramped up our work with corporations and foundations, but in the United States today, to get a major infusion of cash, meaning at least six figures, 100,000, 250,000, 500,000, $1 million from a corporation or foundation, those are not gifts that happen overnight. On average, in the United States for nonprofit organizations, a major gift takes 18 to 24 months to close. And I should add, that doesn't take into account the vast number of competitors who are also submitting proposals, perhaps in the same field as ours. We counted up, as you know, in the strategic planning process, almost 400 nonprofits in the United States today working on gender equity. Yes, that is very good for us in coalition building and sharing our collective message of hoping to advance equity, but it also means competition for every single dollar. Now, a few more things on this. Because we've carefully looked at our operations expenses, which are very difficult, if not impossible to fund, many critical functions for our organizations like human resources, our finance team that manages our national finances, as I said earlier, and IT have to be funded out of unrestricted revenues. But unrestricted revenues are at a premium. Those are very difficult dollars to receive. And they're also very difficult to receive even from our valued members who have been with us for decades and decades. Because for years, AAUW has encouraged funding to the Eleanor Roosevelt Fund, to the Legal Advocacy Fund, to our American Fellowships, to named funds, etc., which does not get to the heart of how you have to run a nonprofit. There are certain things that every nonprofit must have to be able to be in business and to ensure we are meeting IRS and the law. So improving, even as IT, finance, HR, and these other functions are critically important, they are overhead for us. And so we also know that they help with our workflow at the national and branch and state levels, particularly for dues. To keep some vital functions, I should also note that I, along with a few other members of the senior team, took proactive pay cuts. We took pay cuts because we care so much about this organization and wanted to be able to keep as many functions and human beings here working on the good mission work every single day. None of us want to lose any functions, nor do we want to lose any of our valuable team members, but it's necessary for AAUW's survival into the next fiscal year and beyond. So let me give you a couple of more examples. As I mentioned, there were 10 people across the organization that were impacted with our reduction in workforce last week. As the national board knows, we did give them a generous severance package, and we hope to make sure that we can help them in any way possible to receive new employment in the future. In fact, I have personally offered to be a reference for every one of them and have been in touch with several of them, which is very, very good news that many of them are already out there working with our outplacement services on new terrific opportunities. This is a competitive workplace environment, and we are making as many introductions for them as possible. So we cut in a lot of other areas before we had to cut into the muscle and the heart and the limbs of this great organization. Let me give you a couple more examples of how we're thinking about functionality. One is the archive core, and our past is our prologue, right? Everybody has heard that phrase before. The past helps to tell you the history of this great organization, where we've had impact, and tells us stories about today and tomorrow. It can help to inform our work. The work that our archive core has done in coordination with our archivist has been unbelievable, not just in the strategic planning process, but in telling our history, etc. It is not going away. It's hugely impactful. That said, given the focus of the strategic plan, We cannot afford a full-time archivist anymore on our budget lines. That work will go to a part-time staff member and continuing to work with our volunteers going forward. Again, we have to do less with less. You cannot cut $5 million out of a budget and expect everything to remain steady state. Another example is in policy and research. And I will tell you, having worked in academia and at the world's most respected policy think tank, I would not have come to AAUW without research at the forefront and our active policy work. The work that you all do at the very, very grassroots level, regional, state, and national level is extraordinary and will continue. But it is also one of the greatest areas of unfunded mandates for this organization. So as we go backwards in time on those previous slides to pre-2010, we bolstered up the staff here and essentially robbed our savings account to pay for it for a decade. We cannot continue to do that and expect new results. We cannot put our heads in the sand and ignore the fact that our savings account has run dry, and we had to make changes. So on Lobby Corps, let me give you one example on the policy and research team. Lobby Corps advocates provide their time and energy every single week that Congress is in session. And we know and are grateful for these efforts. We're recognized on the Hill, and we're not only recognized on the Hill, we're recognized in every state I visit because our advocates are in every congressional district as volunteers. Lobby Corps will remain a very important of AAUW, but it cannot be sustained weekly going forward, not with staffing. This is not a matter of just one staff member. This is about the entirety of the team and the many, many priorities on the policy and research team. I will also add that there are countless advocacy programs in this town because of the zip code in which we reside that have success without weekly visits, and we have no doubt that AAUW will be no different. Staff is going to be working with the Lobby Corps leadership, and in fact, Deborah Vagans, the Senior VP of Policy Research, and I will meet with Lobby Corps members this Thursday and its working group to develop a schedule for the remainder of the year. And our goal will be to always visit congressional offices at least once a month when Congress is in session, and likely sometimes more than that when the issues are pressing. Think about just today with hashtag Stop the Bans on women's reproductive rights. There are more than 500 events going on in coalition around the country just today. We know that our grassroots advocacy is critically important, and it will continue. Now, let's go ahead and move forward. I want to touch on a few of those uncovered expenses. And again, for those of you who were in one of the state conventions or have seen our state convention presentation, which is available to all members on the AAUW.org website. This is fiscal year 19 uncovered expenses, because the majority of our revenues coming in still remain highly restricted to those funds and areas we've talked about before. This just gives you a sense of critical functional areas we do not want to discontinue, that we want to continue to bolster. So in 19, just for example, on our public policy work and research, it was about $1 million in salaries and benefits, about another $700,000, and there's revenue lines from the Eleanor Roosevelt Fund, LAF, et cetera, but that still left net expenses of $1.3 million that are not covered by our unrestricted assets. All of us at AAUW want to see us in the news more. We want to see us seen as the leader on advancing gender equity. And that's not just a matter of saying, hey, we're available to comment on a story. It takes prodigious work. It takes tenacity to stay on it, and it takes professionals. This was the budget this past year. It's compressed greatly since then. But you'll note that there's no real funding. You can't really get funding from corporations and foundations to bolster your communications effort. Likewise, even wonderful conferences like the National Conference of College Women Student Leaders, the revenues coming in do not fully cover that work or our STEM work, and definitely not our campus work. And so therefore we have about $600,000 right there. And it continues all the way down. As you can see, almost $10 million of really unfunded mandates, things that we expect of this organization, but we've been robbing the piggy bank to pay for far too long. So a few of you have written in wondering why almost 64,000 members, so 63,000, about 900 members were eligible to vote in the national AAUW election, which just ended, electing your new board of directors for 2019 and beyond, as well as approving your public policy priorities. That said, I do think it's important to note who is responsible for what. This is about nonprofit management, and there are very clear delegations of authorities between the CEO, myself, and the National Board of Directors. There are very clear delineations in our bylaws as to who does what. So, for example, on staffing, that is my responsibility as the CEO in concert with the senior staff. Every one of our senior VPs had to make very difficult, very emotional decisions, but had to do it based on quantitative and qualitative analysis of our capacity and our ability to have mission impact, knowing we had to make $5 million cuts across the board. The fiscal year 20 budget has already been approved by your National Finance Committee and has been submitted as draft to your national board. They reviewed it again last week. This was put together by the CEO and the senior staff in concert with the Finance Committee, and the board will be voting on that in the coming weeks at their board meeting. As we think about the strategic plan and your staffing, your national office priorities, that again is set by the CEO and the senior staff and the national board. Many of you said, why weren't we consulted as to these changes? That would not be in keeping with good nonprofit management at all. It is not to say that members are not valued, but we cannot make decisions by 64,000 voices. That is why there is a hierarchy of decision making. I am trying very, very hard to be as transparent with every single one of you, which is why the state convention presentation was available and sent out to all members and is still available on the website now, even if your state did not host a convention, so that you had clarity around where we are and where we are going. Okay, now, it is not all doom and gloom. Even with saying all of this, again, I want to remind you of what I said at the very beginning about this. We can be highly impactful as a $15 to $16 million organization. And the proposed fiscal year 2020 budget, which your national board will either thumbs up or thumbs down or tweak with us at their June board meeting, we can have great, great impact. I will say we've had record-breaking stats for media mentions of AAUW in national and international media coverage. We had stories in more than 125 major media outlets, from ABC to NPR to USA Today to the Washington Post, and our 2019 Equal Pay Day coverage was also prestigious. We are and remain one of the most esteemed gender equity organizations in the nation. So far this year, we have advanced pay equity legislation in dozens of states. In fact, it's already passed in 4 states this year. And we've been working with the historic number of women and allies in Congress to pass in a bipartisan way the Paycheck Fairness Act in the U.S. House of Representatives. We've led the fight against rollbacks to Title IX, and we've already trained more than 25,000 women in salary negotiation this fiscal year. Just in the past few days, we were featured on NBC News' Know Your Value, connecting our work to advance the next generation. And we released our Deeper in Debt student loan research, showing why we still need to keep trailblazing pathways for women in all of education. Truly, we are just getting started. I know that AAUW's members are unstoppable, and we truly appreciate your support as we ensure our vitality for decades to come. Now, what can you do next? Many of you know that we have launched an effort to first, in the strategic plan, train 10 million women in salary negotiation as part of a 3-pronged effort towards closing the gender pay gap once and for all. What is that 3-pronged approach? 1, we're going to continue, thanks to the great work of the policy and research team, as well as all of you at the grassroots level, to ensure we're improving our policies and laws at a municipal, state, and national level. That fight for stronger laws will not stop. Second, we're working with industries, sectors, and employers directly to help them improve their business practices, to ensure that there's greater transparency on hiring and promotion, regular pay audits, etc., so women can continue to thrive in the workplace and not stagnate. But third is we can empower women towards their own financial futures, and that gets to our proven Work Smart and Work Smart online programs, as well as Start Smart. Now, 10 million is a really, really big number. Many of you who attended state conventions know that this year, for the first time in our history, we received the largest corporate grant ever from AAUW. We received a one-time $500,000 grant from the Coca-Cola Foundation, but as part of that, we have to train 100,000 women by August of 2019. Please, if you have not yet, even though I said we've already trained about 25,000, the majority of those people who have signed up are not AAUW members. This is the easiest thing you can do to be an ambassador of what we talk about in ensuring we can close the pay gap. Perhaps you are retired. I guarantee you are negotiating for something in your life, even if it's who does the dishes tonight or who takes out the trash. You also might be negotiating as you're thinking about buying a new car or a new condo or a vacation or the like. But frankly, it's not about just what's in it for you. It is because you are AAUW's ambassadors. If you don't understand the curriculum of what's on salary.aauw.org, how are you going to convince others to take our salary negotiation training? Please, please, please sign up today and encourage 5 friends outside of AAUW to do the same. I would also add, as you think about new contributions you might be making to AAUW, to please consider our greatest needs. Many of you, as I've talked with you around the nation, like me, did not know that #MeToo was coming. None of us really got up that morning in October of 2017 and knew this was the day Hollywood would have a reckoning, or that Matt Lauer would go down on NBC, or that we would see this rattle through not just Fortune 100 or 500 companies, but in our nonprofit sectors, in our educational institutions, etc. But AAUW, if you are giving solely to restricted funds like Legal Advocacy Fund or our fellowships and grants, will not be able to provide rapid response to what's happening right now impacting women and girls. We will not be able to be nimble and agile to make sure we're addressing what we can do for women and girls in education, in the workplace, and in retirement and leadership. So please, please consider supporting AAUW's greatest needs as well. Now, that about concludes all that I am here to share with you today. But I do want to say this. I understand fully how difficult it is to hear this news about serious budgetary changes having to be made. But this is about our future. Frankly, our mission and purpose are unchanged. We're all here because we care about women and girls. We're all here to advance equity. And every one of your senior staff here and the entirety of the AAUW community is committed to continuing to do just that. We know we can do it with your help. And with that, I will turn over to the executive email box and see if there are any immediate questions. Thank you. Okay, somebody is asking the question about talking about the funds procured by the sale of the building. Frankly, I believe in some cases it was told to you that that would be going into an endowment that would be paying for our lease. That is a falsehood. It went in to pay again to get back into our reserves, which are now down to historic lows. Because we had used up that savings account, that took into account, honestly, all that had been spent down for a decade. And so even though we had about $16 million from the sale of the building, you saw on that previous slide that we had already spent down over $45 million. So the sale of the building did not create a magic fund, and in fact actually is hindering us more in our ability to have more impact.
Kim, we have another question on our membership database and being woefully out of date. Do want to give a little bit of update on our technology plans, or would you like me to?
Yeah, maybe Shannon, if you want to. Shannon is our managing director and chief of staff, and she manages all of our operations, including IT and finance. So if you could address, I'd be grateful.
Sure. So we are fully in agreement that our technology pieces, particularly for the membership database, are really not sufficient to what we need as an organization or what you need as volunteers for AAUW. So we have started a process of redoing that. We've put an RFP out and for a new CRM, which is Constituent Relationship Management System. And hopefully that will come within the next probably 12 to 18 months, to be perfectly honest. Just to give you a bit of background on that, between our current technology that we're working off for the MSD and some of our other systems are between 15 and 20 years old. And that is obviously dinosaur years when we're talking about technology, as it changes, daily, it feels like. So really we had to look at where we currently are. Our systems are very intertwined. There's systems on top of systems on top of systems. So disentangling all of that has taken a little bit of time, and it will take some time to completely figure out. But we do have a plan in place, and we are actively looking for new solutions there. And that will include a new member portal that will make it easier for states and branches to manage all of their information in the system, as well as for members to be able to see their own information in a little bit of an easier way, whether that be from a dues perspective or a donation perspective as well. So please do know that we are working on it actively, but these things do take time because the systems are very complicated, and we will be working on it for the next year or so on that.
And I'll add, that's also a lot of this, as you know, in the strategic plan, we have 3 mission areas: education and training. Education has always been foundational for AAUW, just like membership has been. Economic security, which is all of our pay equity work, our harassment work, our retirement security work, leadership, obviously in the leadership gap, etc. And the 4th is governance and sustainability. Not only are we making sure we are running as using 21st century best practices in good nonprofit governance, this is also about our sustainability in all regards, and that includes technology. That includes obviously our fiscal readiness for sustainability, but our systems, because bad data in means bad data out. And when our systems were homegrown, as Shannon said, for years, it means it's very difficult to put an overlay on them and correct the problem overnight. But this is part of our strategic plan, and if you refer back to that on the website, you can see some of those objectives. Certainly Shannon and I and the team would be available for more questions if you have them. There's another question about why certain positions were chosen for elimination and not others. And I want to be really clear on this. Every single decision was heartbreakingly difficult. Every one of us cried throughout this process. This has not been easy. You don't like to see terrific human beings leaving. That's why we're doing everything we can to share this information with you. But it's not really about even human beings. It was about functions. And this is a nonprofit business. I know we don't like to think about the word business when we think about a nonprofit organization we're engaged with, but we have a profit and loss statement. We have a responsibility. My responsibility as your CEO is not only to make sure we're moving forward on our mission, but that we're doing that with keen attention to the fiscals, right? And so this was a business decision, even ones that are going to have impact as we made cuts across the organization. This required us to analyze our business model and make hard decisions based on the tasks we have to accomplish over this year and years into the future. These positions to select were difficult because we know people's lives are interrupted. We're truly, truly sorry this is happening. And I have to tell you, it is the only way forward. You might be able to see my face now.
Can we have another question from Carol? Some members who've already renewed without understanding the financial situation may want to redirect the donation portion of their dues. Is this possible?
So the dues are a general gift of $59 for your national dues. So no, you're not able to actually parse out your dues. That said, because that is just steady state. And by the way, that's pretty steady state in every membership organization. In fact, many of you have said to me it's very difficult to maintain the $59 national dues because you're thinking about the value proposition. We too are thinking about the value proposition and looking at membership-based organizations around the nation. We're very different as an association. Most associations, when you're called an association, are actually around your industry. Think about CPAs or teachers or physicians, right, or accountants. We're a values-based association. So our membership dues are actually far less than most associations. And there are a lot of other organizations that are not membership-based that might have donation levels that are higher than ours as well. But we cannot, because we're membership dues driven, we cannot start parsing out portions of our $59, but we can tell you that if you give to AAUW's Greatest Needs Fund, that goes to cover all of our strategic plan initiatives.
Great, and maybe this last question, will the audio and slide set be posted on the AAUW website?
Yes, this will be available to our members. We're not going to post it generally because this is information we're sharing directly with members, so it will be available to members. Good. Anything else? Okay. Well, I will urge you, if you remember from the beginning of the PowerPoint, that you can email us at executive@aauw.org. executive@aauw.org. I will say that my office took staffing cuts as well. So there was an executive office manager or an executive assistant that is no longer with us. So both Shannon Wolf and I are manning that executive email box. You can also email me directly at my last name, CHURCHES, the letter K, so churches K @aauw.org. I hope this is helpful. I cannot emphasize enough how difficult these decisions are, but how necessary they are for AAUW's future. And I thank you very much for being with us today.